Good evening and welcome to Mets 360 here on Riverside. I'm your host, Brian Jura, and we were supposed to record last night, but I screwed up. So I want to thank David for his patience for last night and for agreeing to be on with me here late night tonight. And David, of course, is David Groveman, our guy on the minors. David, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Brian. No big deal. Just, we make it work.
Yep, we try our best. Actually, it turned out to be fortuitous that we waited a day to do our podcast because the Mets made a trade involving a couple of their minor league guys. They traded with the Orioles and they got lefty reliever Gregory Soto and gave up two minor leaguers. And I want to know your thoughts on getting Soto and also if the Mets gave up anything worthwhile to get him.
Well, in terms of Soto, I think it's another player that the Mets need. I think what we saw during their rough patch, which is hopefully over now, that their pitching just would not stand up to all of the injuries that they have. And some of the performances they got from some of the no-name relief pitching may have been a little bit overblown. So getting another, definite arm, especially being that Brooks Raley is not going to be your sort of designated lefty as much as he's likely going to be one of your setup guys. I think that Soto made a lot of sense. In terms of what they gave up, I can tell you that Foster is probably nothing more than filler. I don't think that he was going to be on my top 50 no matter what happened. If you look at Wellington Arasarena, he was doing very well this year. But in previous years that he's been with the Mets, because he's been with the team since 2022, he hasn't really shown this level of skill and this level of success. Might it be real? Yeah, it might be. He may have turned a corner. He's only 20 years old. But I don't think the Mets gave up a whole lot. I think that, he's a bit of a lottery a card that the Orioles could cash in the future. But I think it's one of those situations where I saw the trade happened and had no concerns on our end.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get into the draft a little bit. That's happened the last week or so, certainly within the last time that you and I talked about the minor league system. So, what were your thoughts about the Mets 2025 draft in general and top pick Mitch Voigt in particular?
So I want to start by saying anyone who had a high expectations for the Mets 2025 draft wasn't really living in reality because the Mets top pick was essentially a second rounder. That said, I like Mitch Voigt. I think that he was a solid pick where they were picking. Yes, they reached down a little bit, but they got a player that plays a skill position that has a good hit tool. And not only does he have a good hit tool, but he has a fantastic arm. He was a two-way player at one point. He's not going to be at all in the minor leagues for the Mets, but he's got a cannon of an arm. And while he is currently a second baseman, I think eventually in his development, third base might be the ultimate home for him. Beyond Mitch Voigt, I was not a big fan of the Mets draft. I think that the pick of Antonio Jimenez was a complete waste of a pick. And the next one down, Peter Kusau, is perfectly fine. And actually, Kusau probably ranks higher than Jimenez. I think that the Mets didn't really go for any of the stretch picks that they have in the past, where it's guys that other teams have determined are too hard to sign. The Mets went for just an assortment of guys, and it felt like they dove into just filling their farm system before, there were no more prospects to pick from.
I don't really follow amateur baseball, so it's really hard for me to have an informed opinion on this point. But just from reading what I did about Voigt, I think that's a pretty good pick at 38. So we'll see if he's able to continue developing as a hitter. It's interesting how the Mets have, I don't know if it's coincidence or if it's a focus on their part, but they took Nolan McLean, who is a two-way player, and then they took Carson Benj, who is a two-way player, and now Voigt. They let McLean do both, but they didn't let Benj pitch, and it doesn't sound like they're going to do that with Voigt either.
Well, and I believe that the scouting on Voigt's pitching is that he throws very hard, but not normally in the strike zone. So probably for the best that he is not going to pitch anymore.
Mets have enough of those guys who can't throw strikes. One of which was the key in the Soto trade. Forgive me for butchering his name, but Aracena, I think, had a really inflated walk number. He had a huge number of strikeouts. I forget the number off the top of my head, but even with that giant strikeout, he still only had a strikeout walk ratio of 2. So, it's great
Right.
if you strike
And,
out 11 a game, but if you're giving up 5.5 walks,
he's only given up 38 hits in 64 innings. You give up enough walks, that still bumps your whip back over one.
yeah, it's just too much. Well, wish them luck with the Orioles.
Yes.
Let's talk about something that you and I have certainly focused on, and that's promotions in the minor league system. They just had the minor league all-star games, so that's the traditional time when clubs make promotions for guys who've earned them. And I want to know, did anybody in the Mets that you were following get a promotion here recently? And the flip side of that is anybody that you feel hasn't gotten a promotion that they deserve.
Well, so there were a few players a little bit before the All-Star break and some after that got promotions. Names that come to mind: Santucci, Benj, Suero, Hauk or Hook. I don't know how to pronounce it. And for a number of them, you can say that it was overdue. I think Carson Benj had probably earned his promotion maybe 2 months into the season, and we were just waiting for the time where he would be called to Double A. But I think the more glaring thing isn't who was promoted, it's who wasn't promoted. And those are two very big names, and that's Jet Williams and Jonah Tom. I do not have an explanation for why these two players are still in Double A beyond the fact that my gut keeps telling me that the Mets are dangling them out as trade bait. Um, Jet Williams is still primarily playing shortstop, which is a very, very valuable position in the trade market, but isn't a position he can play with the Mets. And Jonah Tong is still in Double A, producing gaudy numbers where he really needs to be tested in Triple A at this point. He's proven he can do great against Double A. I do not understand what the Mets are doing if they're not just showcasing them as trade assets.
All right, let me run something by you here, and see if you think I'm being ridiculous. Is it possible with Tom that they don't want to expose him to AAA just because of all of the difficulty so many pitching prospects have had in Syracuse, and they essentially bring him to spring training next year with an opportunity to make the rotation?
I mean, there's some truth to be said to that logic, but I think that you have McLean who has succeeded in AAA, ultimately not fantastic against lefty hitters, but he's been very good in play. I think that you're going to have a hard time justifying spring training stats if Tong has a slightly better spring than McLean. Are you going to send the guy who has already succeeded at AAA to the majors? Or are you going to send the guy who's only played in Double A? I think they're doing a disservice by not testing him at that other level where these pitfalls have developed on players and where you've seen some of the Met pitchers climb out of those pitfalls and find themselves again.
So the other player you mentioned was Jet Williams, and I understand that part of the purpose of the minor league farm system is to produce guys to trade to fill holes that you need elsewhere. But unless we get something really, really good, I'm going to be really, really sad if we trade Williams.
I would agree with you. Jet Williams is a very, very good player. I can't explain how someone as tiny as he is generates as much power off the bat, but he is an absolute extra base hit machine. He's not going to hit 30 home runs, but he's going to hit a lot of doubles and triples.
Well, speaking of small prospects, let's talk about Drew Gilbert. Gilbert's been playing well for over a month now. So should we hold out hope that he's more than a fourth outfielder?
So I was actually thinking about filing Gilbert under players who should have been promoted, because really the Mets should have Gilbert, who's hitting in AAA, playing as a platoon with the Mets for center field, and Luis Angel Acuna back in AAA, since he really can't hit at all. I don't know if Gilbert's ever going to be a major league starter or anything better than that. I think it's still longer odds even after some time playing well. But I think that we have to understand. I went through the stats of center fielders in baseball. And if Gilbert can manage a 700 OPS in the majors, it makes him the 13th best center fielder in baseball right now. I don't know that he can do that, but I think that is possible. I don't know that you're going to see true star numbers from him, but I think you could see sort of what we would normally consider average. So average from a skill position, maybe that's worth it, and we can have him up. I want to know why the Mets are sort of stretching out this Luis Angel Acuna experiment in the majors. I think that they would be better off with not only Gilbert in the majors, but probably Pablo Reyes as well. Perhaps I am in the minority thinking that I'd prefer Mauricio starting every day in AAA and fully refining his swing and having Gilbert and Pablo Reyes up in the majors.
Year after year after year, the Mets are turning to the free agent market or the trade market to get themselves a fourth outfielder. And I'm perfectly fine if that's all that Gilbert is. It would just be nice to have one of those internally rather than going out and finding the newest version of Jose Siri, or before him Tyrone Taylor, or before him Keon Broxton, and before him Kevin Pillar, and so on and so on and so on. So if all Gilbert is a fourth outfielder, that's fine with me. Now I
Sure.
want to talk about, go ahead.
No, I just said sure. I was agreeing.
All right, so I want to talk about a guy that I was once fairly high on. I think I've toned it down a little bit, but I still hold out hope for him, and that's Blade Tidwell. He hasn't done great this year, but after his first appearance in the majors and getting sent back to the minors after that, it's been better. It hasn't been great, but it's been better. So, do you see him factoring all into things at the major league level with the Mets, either 2025 or beyond?
So right now, what Tidwell feels like to me, if I'm doing a comparison, is he feels like the new Tyler McGill. I don't think he's ever going to be part of the Mets' plan A for the team, but I think he's the first name that's going to be on that plan B list. I think he's the player that they're going to hold in the minors as long as they can as that emergency guy to come up when they need a starter. If he is going to make an impact with the Mets, I think what Tidwell needs to figure out is if he might have more of a future as a relief pitcher. I think part of what was going on with him was he had some control issues when he got up to AAA. Maybe if he's in a relief role, he's going to be able to hit the strike zone more, probably crank up his fastball a little bit more, and maybe become an impact reliever who has the ability to go a couple innings.
I think Tidwell's fastball certainly plays at the major league level. The times that I've seen him, the issue seems to be much more of the off speed stuff. He'll land a couple of really nice breaking balls, and then he can't find them for strikes. And that's just a tough recipe to succeed. I'm pulling for him, but I'm not sure if he's got much more of a future than multi-inning reliever. All right. Well, you mentioned Luis Angel Acuna just a second ago. And to me, I've always grouped him along with two other minor league players, and that's Nick Morabito and Marco Vargas. And I feel like they are all essentially the same player because they have great speed, but they don't have a whole lot of power to their game. So they need a high BABIP to succeed. So I want to know, are you bullish on any of these three players?
So I wouldn't say that I'm bullish on any of the three, but perhaps I will surprise listeners to the podcast as I've gone on record saying how much I hated Nick Morabito's draft pick when the Mets originally got him, and even have written at length about how much I dislike him as a prospect. He seems to me like he has a relatively high floor as a player. Every time I'm like, all right, he's in a slump, he's going to sort of disappear from things. He just sort of hangs in there and gets these hits and multi-hit games and gets his average back up there. He ultimately seems like he's a more consistent bat than Acuna, and I think that ultimately you need a fourth outfielder, sometimes a fifth outfielder. That's what Morabito is, and that's a valuable thing to have. I think that Vargas is still young, but you're probably right. He's not going to develop a lot more power or speed than he's already showed you. I'm not sure that there's anything there. And I think we have seen from Acuna what we will see from Acuna, which is he's defensively gifted and he can run the base paths, but he just doesn't have the ability to get on base consistently enough to be valuable at the major league level.
So you touched on the one thing that I think Morabito has going for him, especially compared to the other two players that I've lumped him in with, and that's he's already in the outfield. While somebody like Jet Williams or Acuna, we talk about them as potentially being outfielders, but they've played so much more on the dirt. And it's great to have high hopes and say, oh yeah, Williams can be a center fielder, but until they actually do it, it's a lot of wishful thinking. But Morabito is already a center fielder. So if Gilbert can't be the fourth outfielder, perhaps Morabito can.
Yeah, and I mean, I would stress that I think Gilbert is a better hitter than Morabito. And I think that if Gilbert is going to wash out as a starting outfielder, he probably has the inside track. But I think Morabito is probably good enough to be a bench player at the major league level.
All right, well, let's talk about another prospect who caught my eye, and that's Eli Serrano. He got off to such a great start this year, but he's cooled off lately. So, where do you stand with him as a top prospect?
I think I have him somewhere at the bottom end of my top 25. I'm no longer bullish on him like I once was, but I do think that he still has some of that prospect shine left to him. I think that part of when he was succeeding was when he was surrounded by a bunch of other talented bats at the advanced A level. And I think the other thing that you're going to see is if he gets a promotion to double A, you're going to see him get a little bit of a bump in his offensive output. I don't know that he has more than a ceiling as a bench player. Based upon where the Mets drafted him, that may be absolutely fine. He has more power than Morabito, but I don't think he's going to be able to have as high of an average. So, it's one of those situations of how much value do you place on reaching the major leagues at all.
So, that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure we can give that the time that it deserves. But just looking at Serrano, what was he, a fourth or a fifth round draft pick?
Yeah, I don't know offhand, but yeah, that sounds
It's
right.
somewhere. It's somewhere there. It wasn't. It was in the top 10 rounds, but it wasn't. Top 2 or 3 rounds. So he was drafted as a draft eligible sophomore. So he could be essentially playing his junior year in college right now. So the fact that he's in A ball and holding his own has to be a good sign.
You're right. And I think that it's one of those players where I think that he's done enough in advanced A already that he should probably begin next year in double A. I don't think he needs to prove anything else in Brooklyn. And I think he's been good enough to say, yes, he understands this level. Let's see what he can do at the next level where hitters seem to blossom much more in Binghamton than they do in Brooklyn.
Let's talk for a second about what is potentially the feel good story of the year, and that's the return of Matt Allan. to the mound for the first time, I think, since 2019. He hasn't been pitching very often. He only pitches, 2 innings or so per game. But his last 2 games have come out of the bullpen. So, do you think that this means the Mets no longer view him as a potential starter, or is that reading too much into it? And how would you characterize his year overall?
So when a pitcher like Allan, who's coming off of an injury, switches to relief in the middle of the season, it's not the same as other players who have that happen. We saw Dom Hamill get switched into the bullpen, and I do think Hamill is done starting. I think he's a relief pitcher now, and he's probably not really a top 50 prospect anymore. I think Allen was switched into relief because he hasn't pitched in a very long time and he is suffering from arm fatigue. I think that the Mets don't want to push him too far too fast where they're going to see him get injured again because he's been injured a lot. I do think that I had hopes that were probably above what was realistic for his season. I really wanted to see a little bit more success, but any sort of ability to get through an entire season without a significant injury would be a success for Matt Allan. And I'm really interested to see what he can do if he's returning next year after a year of healthy play and maybe getting lengthened out more and having more stamina beneath him and seeing if he can regain some of that mystique he had when the Mets drafted him.
So, do you think there's any chance that Allen pitches in the offseason? Do you see him as potentially going to the Arizona Fall League or somewhere winter ball?
Well, I think it would be much more telling about his future as reliever if he goes to the Arizona Fall League to pitch in relief. I think if he does pitch in the winter, it's going to be a situation where it's starting, but it's not going to necessarily be deep innings. I think that it's much more likely that we see Allen go and sort of stay at the Florida facility and really work on building his physique and his stamina back with the Met coaching staff.
Well, we have reached the crazy prediction time of the show. I'm going to give you what I think is a crazy prediction and then ask you to comment on it. And then we'll flip roles where you give me your crazy prediction. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
My crazy prediction is that after the acquisition earlier today of Gregory Soto, I almost said Juan Soto. We can never have enough Sotos. But after the acquisition of Gregory Soto, the Mets are not going to make any more moves before the deadline. So tell me, is that crazy?
It would be disappointing, and I think that that hits the point of crazy in a way. Um, it's I like my crazy predictions to be on the side of realistic, and I think that is the right sort of balance you've gotten there. I can see a future where that happens, but I don't think it's at all likely. I think that the Mets understand that their offense is missing something. I don't know how or who they get, but I think that that's definitely in the cards that they know that they need to get one other player. And I wouldn't put it off the table for the Mets to get a starter, but I don't know where the starter plays. So I don't know exactly why there's so many rumors about the Mets getting a starter.
Well, they DFA Blackburn and problem solved. All right, give me your crazy prediction.
So it upsets me terrible to even have this prediction, but I will give you both my grounding in reality and what the prediction is. So I mentioned earlier that it seems to me like the Mets are showcasing Jet Williams and Jonah Tong as trade bait. So my prediction is that the Mets trade one or both of these players for a player that is not expected to be on the trade market at all. This is players like Byron Buxton of the Twins, who has said he doesn't want to leave Minnesota, or even an absolutely absurd and outrageous trade like the Diamondbacks trading Corbin Carroll. I think that the Mets, the only way I could see them trading these two players is if it is for someone who is young, affordable, and skilled at a position they need. So I think that my prediction is the Mets trade one or two of their quote unquote untouchable players to make a gigantic splash.
Well, I'm going to give you a crazy on that one, just because our GM, or Pobo, if you prefer, hasn't shown the I don't know if willingness is the right word, but he hasn't displayed that rolling the dice on a big move either in Milwaukee or here in New York at the trade deadline. So I'm going to say that's not going to happen. I'm going to say you succeeded. That's crazy.
All right, fair enough.
All right, so let's talk about a couple of high dollar international free agent guys, and that's Simone Wan and Willie Fanyas. They haven't had great success, either one of them, here in the U.S., but the Mets have a lot invested in them, so they're clearly going to get more opportunities. So, how much rope do you think they get, and do you think either of them makes it to Double A?
Well, right now, the play at the low A level has been so bad that I don't really think any of the players there should be counted in or out. I think that this is a lost season for the level. I don't have hope for either of these players becoming major league players right now. I have not really explored the bottom 20 of my top 50 in my recent toolings, but I would guess that one or both of them would be nearing the fringes of staying ranked at all. Maybe even one of them has fallen off. We'll have to see. I do see them being back next season. I can see them advancing as filler players through Double A. I just don't see them reaching the majors based upon any sort of trajectory right now, which is really upsetting because Simon Wan in spring training looked like he could absolutely obliterate a baseball, but he and Fanas have just been met at best in low A. I wanted to see anything, and there hasn't been much signs of life at all.
So we got to see Juan play quite a bit in spring training, and he was a guy who came up in potential five tool player. But to me, he didn't look like a center fielder. He looked very pudgy. He looked like a left fielder, in all honesty. And I think he's going to have to really hit in order to make it if he can't play center field.
I think that, yes, it was going to be his hit tool that would have gotten him anywhere. I don't think that he was looking like that amazing fielder he would need to be. What we saw with the bat in spring training from him did seem to suggest he could have been that player. But what we've seen in his numbers in low A aren't that.
All right. Well, we've talked a lot about Tong in this episode. So I want to group him with three other pitchers and ask who do you think is going to have the best MLB career of the foursome? And in addition to Tong, that's Nolan McLean and Brandon Sproat and Christian Scott. So which one of those four do you feel is going to have the best career?
So I really love this grouping of players because they are a really fun spread of ceiling and floor for talent. Christian Scott, even with him being injured, he's shown success at AAA and the majors. The assumption is that when Scott comes back, he should be able to perform around what he was doing when he was last healthy. But I don't think that anyone who saw him, or even his biggest fans, would say Christian Scott is a future ace or even really a number two level pitcher. I think Scott is probably a mid rotation starter in the majors, and that's plenty good. Moving on to Sproat and McNeil, they both have shown signs that they can be impact pitchers. Sproat had some issues in AAA where McLean hasn't, but both have very similar issues with their lefty splits. It's one of those situations where they both have a higher ceiling than Scott, but until someone succeeds in the majors, you don't know what they're going to be. Jonah Tong has the highest ceiling of Met pitching prospects. I really think that he has an outrageous ability to strike batters out and avoid giving up hits. The reality is he hasn't been tested at triple. And I know you gave that theory that it could be the Mets want to move him right from Double A to the majors, but it's hard for me to see the Mets doing that and not testing the waters in Triple A first. So if you put a gun to my head, the easy answer of your question is Nolan McLean. He's had the best mix of having, succeeded at a high level with some high ceiling capability. But my heart tells me it's going to be Jonah Tong because I am capable of just playing favorites, and he's my favorite current Mets prospect.
All right, so let me ask you a quick follow up on Tom. He's got it's not an awkward delivery, but it's an unusual delivery because it's so over the top. Um, he's certainly not a side armor or three quarters. It's over the top. It's been compared to um, two-time Cy Young Award winner Tim Lincecum's delivery, and certainly that's good company to keep. But then again, Lincecum flamed out early in his major league career. So, do you have any worries about Tong's delivery?
So it is a strange delivery, and I've seen in games where he does get into a little bit of a walk problem, which is part of the reason that I do want him to test out play. Every single pitcher in baseball is an injury risk. I don't think that we are seeing, pitchers like Bartolo Colon or Eddie Guardado whose arms are just made of rubber and they can pitch every single day and nothing's going to affect them. I don't know that it's more or less likely that Tong faces an injury that's going to shorten his career than McLean. I think either one of them could see something like that happen. Um, I understand with delivery not being the same that could be an effect, but right now that delivery is getting the results we want, and I just want to see those results continue.
I know you perhaps aren't his biggest fan, but Keith Law said, I'm not a fan of Tong's delivery, but as long as he's getting his results, I'll keep grading him appropriately. He's certainly been impressed by the results that Tong has had as well. All right, well, we are just about done here. David, do you have any last thoughts?
I have been very happy with the upper levels of the Met minor league system this year. I don't recall having too many seasons where advanced A through AAA have had quite so many players at once playing well. Usually it's one or two players a level, and it's really been a very nice mix of players. So I am overall pretty pleased with the overall health of the Mets system, but I am concerned for the future of the Met system as I do not see the same level of talent sort of pooling at the lower levels. Certainly, there's some guys in the DSL, but I would love to see Mitch Voigt succeed right away because the Mets need some help coming up from the lower levels.
Well, I'm going to focus on the first part where you were expressing happiness over everybody from A ball on up. So I love to end on a positive note. So we're going to end it there. David, thanks so much for sticking through with us. And for those of you listening at home, thanks for your support. Good night, everyone.